Good evening. My name is Amos Harel from Haaretz newspaper. The summarizing event of the first day with the president, who is still with us. It was a long day, and there were many threats but many opportunities. And in order to make some order in this complex, confusing picture, is the head of INSS, General in Reserves, Amos Yadlin. Good evening. Yes. The Israeli intelligence, when they talk about 2016, they say similar things to what it said in 2015 and 14. Three things: lack of stability, lack of certainty, and volatility. The same traits we saw in the last 3 years. Let's try to survey in brief the various angles, but we must start with Iran. In the last decade, this was something hovering over us, and you also started with Iran. Would you say that this cloud was relieved in a way after the Vienna agreement and after the sanction removal on Saturday? Look, as opposed to what we could understand yesterday and today, that Iran disappeared and Daesh arrived instead, and that the Islamic State is more dangerous than the Islamic Republic, I think it's wrong. I think Iran and obviously Hezbollah, which is the same body, are still the most significant threat tomorrow morning as well, and also in the long run against the State of Israel. However, the deal that was signed in July in Vienna gives us time out. And if we see a slide that evaluates this agreement, it has three components. Not this one. This agreement has three components. In the short run, and that's what happened yesterday, and the Ambassador Shapiro described it very well. The Iranians stepped away from the bomb. The only existential threat on the State of Israel, and that is also potential. If you want to go home today with one good news, there's no existential threat on the State of Israel, not in 16 and not in 2017. This threat of the Iranian nuclear went back, and Iranians who are now were 2 months away from a bomb today, they are 1 year away from a bomb, maybe more. With 12,000 centrifuges less, 98% of the enriched material went to Russia. With a nuclear plant that is cemented, we got time to get ready for the second part of the agreement, which is a bad thing, because after 10, not 15, the Iranians start crawling ahead by authority of the agreement, and they come on the 10th year, 12th, 15th, to a non-limited nuclear plan, which is legitimate, and that's the problem of this deal. However, we have to get ready for it. 10, 15 years is a long time, and anybody who believes in the capability of Israel to create possibilities, operational and political, in order to cope with this thing, which we will see in the long run, can say that we can sigh a sigh of relief, but we have to get ready. We have another problem, and that is the resources that the Iranians get after the removal of the sanctions in the very short run to the non-nuclear activities. But here I want to say two things that can cause you to go home happier. First of all, the State of Israel is very strong. For years we've been saying to our friends in the world and to our ally, the United States, we're going to cope with Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas because we are strong and we know how to cope with it. Just you deal with this nuclear issue for us. And they did, maybe not in the best way, not the most correct way, but all the other things we can cope with on our own. It's not that Iran tomorrow morning is going to get hundreds of billions. This is also a bad evaluation. Iran today even if it doubles the export of oil because of the reduction of prices, it will show less milliards than it did in 2014, because Iran has economic and social needs that will require a lot of money. And we just have to look at it. We see what happens with those monies that Iran will get. So we talk about the Israeli response. Does it really depend in our good relations with the United States and coordination? The president said a few months ago, he spoke about the components of the Israeli strength, and he said the relations with the United States and the relationship with the United States, and the third place, relations with the United States. So it's a sense of humor, but do we really rely on the cooperation with the states to be on the same page in identifying violations of Iran, and also what's going to be signed in the next year, that deal regarding the American security assistance? The state of Israel never asked the United States to fight for us. We didn't want one American soldier to shed his blood for Israel. Israel can fight for itself. Together with that, Israel, with all its strength, is a small country, and never, forever, would it wants an ally which is a superpower. If anybody who thinks he can find another superpower and makes a pivot to Asia or another place, remind me when the last time any other state, apart from the United States since 1956, laid a veto on an Israeli proposal resolution in the Security Council. I don't want to talk about the $3 billion a year. Maybe we're so strong we can give it, but the diplomatic status in the world depends on the goodwill of the President of the United States, not the Congress, the President. That's why I really recommend, even if we'd have some disagreement with the United States, the deal was not a deal that we dreamt about. However, after it was agreed upon, please put on slide number 8, after it was agreed upon, we have to prepare for the future. And there are no more prophets, neither in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, or Washington, not even in New York. And the future can develop in 3 scenarios, from left to right. The first scenario, I call it the Norwegian scenario. After the Iranians, after 15 years, entered the international community, there are investments in Iran. The young generation of the Facebook says to the Ayatollahs that they don't understand the world. An Iranian Gorbachev comes up, and after 15 years, there's no threat from Iran in spite of the deal. This is one possibility. Second possibility, I call it the North Korean scenario. North Korea also signed a very similar deal with the United States, less detailed. The Americans did their homework, and wherever they could close some sort of breakthrough, they made every effort to say. But the Iranians can just say, we are forgetting the deal. That's what the North Koreans did. And to go towards a bomb, or to break out to a bomb, or to sneak out to a bomb, and we have to prepare for that. And the third scenario, that the Iranians are neither Norwegian nor North Koreans. They're much cleverer. They're Iranians. They wait in a strategic patience, and they do not direct themselves to 8 o'clock news or tomorrow morning. They see half a generation forward, and after 15 years they have unlimited nuclear capabilities, and that we cannot reach, not to the second scenario and not to the third one. And had I been the Prime Minister of Israel, had I consulted him, and maybe I did, I would tell you, instead of waging war on our ally, go to President Obama, describe this slide to him, and tell him the following: every weekend you go to the church and I'll go to the synagogue, and we shall pray to the rosy scenario, but at the same time we'll prepare ourselves for the 2 others. And we are going to speak together, the United States and Israel, on a parallel deal, because the Israeli cabinet that convened a day after the deal came out with the amazing resolution that Israel is not part of the deal. We didn't think of that, and I'm saying Israel should have come to its ally, the United States, and said, you brought a deal, it's problematic, it's not perfect, but let's try to prepare in all the parameters that you can see here on the slide and to make sure that Iran remains at because if America goes other places like Daesh, because we also think that Daesh is the only problem, and Russia is in Ukraine, and China is in the Chinese South Sea. No, we have to look after Iran, to monitor it, that it doesn't violate the deal. What does it mean exactly, a violation of the deal? Because the administration may have a tendency not to see the violations. That's its legacy. And we have to make it clear what we do and how we bring back the sanctions and what kind of a plan do we do so that the Iranians will know that there's also a military option. Because today the Iranian sits in Tehran and says the following: the Americans have capability, but they don't have the will. Israelis have a will, but they don't have the capability. That's what they think in Tehran. Sometimes they're mistaken, but they think today that there's no real military option, and that will help them a lot if they decide to break out. I just want to take you back to Daesh, which you mentioned. You were sort of underestimating, but you focused on the Iranian issue. Some of the people in this conference spoke completely differently, almost in terms of a third world war regarding what's happening in the Arab world and the Daesh. Do you want to put it in different proportions? Yes, I think, just like President Obama, who said in the State of the Union that it's not a third world war, and I have one important observation which says, did anybody put Daesh to be target number one in the national priority and to finish it up? Vis-à-vis Daesh, there are two coalitions, one of 63 countries and two organizations that was managed on behalf of the United States by General Four-Star John Allen, who established this coalition. He didn't command it because he coordinated it. And there's another coalition, less sympathetic, that bombs without checking who is who, led by Russia, Iran, and Syria, and Hezbollah. And neither these nor these are fighting Daesh as the main target. I saw one body that does fight Daesh as a main target. It's not a state. 20 million people who didn't get a state, as opposed to 5 million who do want it, and nobody in the world takes care of them, and these are the Kurds. They put Daesh as a target because they had to fight for their lives. And they defeated it. Daesh is not undefeatable. It's not indestructible. And they have a lot of, they have the Islamic State, and that. And by the way, they did us a big favor. We know how to fight against states. We know how to fight against states. It's much more difficult for us to fight the element of Daesh, which is an ideology, which goes in the Facebook state, and you cannot stop it. It gets to millions of people. And from this million, 1 promille goes to the streets and stab. But you can fight Daesh. You just have to define them as the main goal, main target, and you have to fight. I'll give you another very simple example. Daesh sells oil to its enemy, to Assad. He sells oil through Turkey as well. A year and a half, nobody bombed the oil wells, because the environment was so important or whatever. Ask General Allen afterwards, and they didn't want to hit the drivers of the containers because it's not their fault. After the Russians came and started working, so the second coalition started as well. Their bank, where all the money is, a year and a half it took. Therefore, I'm saying, look, the aircrafts and the boots on the ground that don't exist. Don't exist. There are 3,000 Americans in the Middle East who help fight Daesh. The United States, when it wanted to defeat Germany in the First World War and the Second one, millions fought. When the Russians wanted to fight against Hitler, millions fought. This is not the situation today. Therefore, it's not a Third World War. And when Daesh really are going to do the attack, I was asked after Paris, terrible attack, whether this is it's like September 11 for France. I wrote that unfortunately it is a wake-up call, but it's going to come back in another few weeks. I guess you need, and I hope it doesn't happen, 4,000, 40,000, so that the world finally will say, this is first priority, and we're going at it. By the way, there are tens of thousands of casualties. It happens in Syria and Iraq, but look, Daesh has not killed, I will say it to be cautious, 5% of what Assad, Hezbollah, and Iran killed in Syria. 250,000 people. Some say that it's already 300,000. The UN stopped counting. And Daesh, they photographed the one that they killed. They cut his head off. They beheaded it. They burnt it. They're much better in that. But if any person is important as a person, I think that the whole world is in a moral position which is very problematic. And I don't compare anything to the Holocaust. That I leave to others. But therefore, Serbia, Srebrenica, Rwanda, the fact that 250,000 people are getting killed, and the world explains why it cannot send boots on the ground, and the aircrafts have some Syrian anti-aircraft weaponry. We sleep well at night when it's 200 kilometers from our border. I think, in my mind, we have to check ourselves and the moral barometer. So the closest place that it happens, it's Syria. It's 2 hours drive from here, and also on the Golan Heights. We cannot choose a side. These two axes are bothering us. Do you think the radical Shiite bothers us more, or the Sunni radical is an option for Israel, or actually Israel does what we used to say in irony about the Iraq-Iran war, and that is, I wish success to both sides. Well, I talked about the moral aspect, but beyond that, we have Daesh on our borders. They didn't shoot one bullet to the state of Israel. This quiet that we had in the Golan Heights for 40 years was violated by factors that were activated by Hezbollah and Iran, and sometimes the Syrian army. We are at a point that it's very difficult to select. We have the devil that we know, which is Assad, and we have the devil that we hadn't known in 2011, and today we do. And these two factors are problematic. I belong to those who think that Israel should have made a plan after it entered to the tunnels. Things happen around you that you don't understand. There's a lot of uncertainty, as you said. But I have a surprise for you. Uncertainty in the Middle East and what we see around us in the last 5 years is not a situation that's going to end in 2016. This is going to be around us 5 years, maybe 30, and we should start acting so that the factors that act against us will disappear. And really the question which is most interesting that we started the research in INSS just now is how to try to cause the two extremist factors will disappear. But if you force me to select whether Assad is going to remain, or any other Sunnis, more radical, less radical, I tell you that Assad is not just Assad as a murderer, as a problematic factor. He's the main axis of the radical axis that goes from Iran to Damascus, to Beirut with Nasrallah, and also to the Hamas in Gaza. This is an axis that is against the state of Israel, wants to destroy it, does not recognize any Oslo Accord, 2 states for 2 nations, nothing. There'll be no peace if this axis continues to be strong. To dismantle this axis, this is a strategic mission of the state of Israel. And if there'll be a Sunni regime in Syria, one or the other, it definitely won't be social democrat. However, he will never cooperate with Iran and with Hezbollah. And as we speak, we did it also in the last conference, and before that, they murder Sunnis in Syria. So the situation in the Golan Heights can be a bit more difficult for a commander of a division, but I used to be one. But the Prime Minister in his office in Jerusalem and the Minister of Defense and the Chief of Staff who was here today will be much easier if Syria will get out of the radical axis. Okay, we spoke about regional developments. Let's talk about our backyard. We are in the midst of a terror wave. The Chief of Staff said that there was 101 stabbings. And last night, a terrible murder, a very difficult attack today. Isn't it time to call it the third intifada?
I have been calling it the third intifada for about 2 months. Because what's an intifada? An intifada is a situation that impacts the state of Israel strategically. And as I've said, we don't have an existential threat, but there are many strategic threats. And the strategic threat of terrorism is measured by the number of casualties, because every person in Israel is important, every life, but it's also measured by its impact on the state's strategic parameters, because between 2000 and 2004, the state of Israel went backwards in many aspects, in terms of the economic growth, in terms of its international status, in terms of the sense of security. If you listen to the Chief of Staff this morning, he talked about a sense of security and real security among citizens. This voyage of using weapons, using cars, using knives in terror attacks is causing more damage to the state of Israel beyond those victims that it is taking away from us. And whether it's tourism, whether it's the state of business in Jerusalem, whether it's the sense of security each and every civilian has. And that's why I do view it as an intifada. This morning I said that one of the things we need to learn is what to take, what lessons to learn from the past and from history, and when to say, guys, there's a new phenomenon happening. And now we have a phenomenon where we don't have Palestinian leadership that headed the former intifada. We don't have these organized organizations where we can have warning before the terrorist attack, or to try and thwart the attack or the cell it began from. We have a problem of enticement. We have a problem with frustration. We have other things. And through the social media, and through the young friends, young men and women in the Institute, they are telling me, Amos, you don't understand. There is another country at play here in the Middle East. Iraq crumbled, Syria collapsed, and Yemen crumbled, and Libya collapsed. But the Facebook state is here to stay. It's very interesting. Aside from Israel, it's the only democratic state in the Middle East. Anyone can say whatever they like. Very rapidly, at the speed of light, it reaches everybody else. And it's a country with no censorship, and it's a country that pushes people to action. And sometimes I have to tell them, okay, calm down. They think it's the only country, and Facebook will change the world. But look, Assad doesn't really care about Facebook. He has a better mechanism from the past. It's called 3.0 bullets. You just kill with them. And the Saudi king also has a different mechanism, tons of money, and a few knives here and there when you need to execute whoever you need to execute. But Facebook is here to stay, and it's part of the game. It wasn't part of the game in the past. It's not an ace up the sleeve, but it is definitely part of this group that needs to be taken care of and taken into account. One of the scenarios that was discussed in the simulation this morning discussed a collapse of the Palestinian Authority or some sort of deterioration because Abu Mazen resigns. Next month he'll be 81 years old, and it sounds like he's in good health. but this day is drawing near. Will this be a game changer? A complete change of the Palestinian and Israeli theater? Well, with all due respect to leaders, presidents, prime ministers, they can be replaced apparently, and people and nations can choose replacements and substitutes, and there's no vacuum. Aside from the actual person manning the office, other vectors will continue to be at play. Therefore, I don't think it's a game changer. Perhaps there'll be an opportunity for each of the actors to revisit and rethink their strategy, their tactics, where they're headed. I saw that leaders that are sitting on their chair, no matter how old they are, they have this energy that comes from the throne, from the chair, so to speak. It gets them to the age of 90, even 92. Perhaps Abu Mazen is such a person, perhaps not. I think that we need to prepare for the fact that the West Bank and the Palestinian people are very separate and divided, whether it's Fatah against Hamas, whether it's Fatah within itself. And we need to make sure that when Abu Mazen decides that the term that has ended 5 years ago should really be ended, or he resigns for any other reason, or God will intervene, either way we need to be prepared for those things we have been prepared for many years already, for this vacuum that will be created in the Palestinian society, in their security and defense mechanisms, and their apparatuses, in this framework and the system that is still taking place. Because, as I've said, it's a third intifada, but it can be a third intifada or a third intifada. Well, you talked about the various damages of the last 3.5 months. Tourism, the state of affairs in Jerusalem, business. You didn't mention what is gradually happening with the international arena. That is a longer process. It's been happening for years, actually, since the peace process stagnated. We saw it in Operation Cast Lead in the Goldstone report, but it's been happening also within Israeli society, right wing and left wing. Do you feel that Israeli society or Israel at large is losing its status in the international arena? Its status is being eroded surrounding the occupation question? I think it needs to be put into perspective. We have a problem with the international community, and this problem partly stems from anti-Semitism, basic anti-Semitism, basic anti-Israeliness, that this place is an occupied territory and the Jewish people has no right to have its own country, and that is something that we need to address. But part of our problem stems from a certain policy that the current government has adopted. And what we propose, and since I see that our time is almost up, please put on the slide of the comprehensive overall policy of the State of Israel, because we would have expected that the one who said that Iran is Israel's main problem will take steps that will allow it to deal with Iran by making concessions in other areas. I think that the super strategy of Israel is to get out of these trenches we dug 5 years ago and to turn from passiveness to activity, to promote a policy that is not extreme but very different from what we see today. And I am not one of those who blame Israel for not having reached a peace accord. I think the Palestinians are at least as much to blame, if not more. Perhaps they're listening to us all when we say that the state of Israel should be 2 states for 2 nations, and others say that if not, then Israel is lost. So why should they agree to a 2-state solution? If Israel is lost, fantastic, that should be the national goal. I think that we need to put on the table a proposal for an arrangement, a political accord with the Palestinians, using the parameters that we all know will be incorporated in it. But what is the tragedy? We all know what parameters we need in order to reach an agreement. Now we need to just adjust it here and there in negotiations. Each one of the sides needs to make 3 painful concessions, 3 difficult concessions, 3 concessions that go against their historical faith, their national narrative, the religious components within it, which means Israel gives up the dream of the greater Israel, acknowledges and recognizes 2 states between the sea and the Jordan River, goes back pretty much to 1967 lines with a block of settlements with some sort of land swap, and the Palestinians also get presence in Jerusalem, certainly in the Arab neighborhoods. And that is difficult concessions. Rabin was not there in the last 2, but the Palestinians also have 3 very painful concessions to them, in their view, and we do need to put ourselves in their shoes, as Mr. Grossman said before. They need to give up the fact that this accord is only temporary. It will have to be final. It will have to be giving up all of the rest of their demands. They will need to recognize that 78% of the land remains with us. They need to give up on the right of return, or if we're nice, say that the right of return is only to the Palestinian state, and they need to give up symptoms of sovereignty in favor of Israel, because at the end of the day we have a big world that is Arab and Muslim and hates us, and they don't want us here, and they'll only accept us if we're very strong. However, we do not see a leader, not on their side, not on our side, who goes out there and says, this is what we need to do. This is the only way to reach a solution. So I'm saying be moderate on the Palestinian side in order to harness both the world, the Americans, the Europeans, to dealing with Iran or IS, whatever you decide is more dangerous, and at the same time find the common denominator between us and the Sunni Arabs around us. I'm not calling them moderate, because Saudi Arabia is not exactly a moderate type of place, but I do call them the Sunni pragmatic Arabs. And when they wake up in the morning, the Saudi king, or the Egyptian president, or the Jordanian king, or our friends in the Gulf states, they see before them 2 threats. Do you remember what we talked about just now? Iran and IS. Exactly what our Prime Minister and Minister of Defense talk about. And therefore, there are common interests that have never been before. And the only way that is preventing this collaboration, beyond all the collaborations that are under the radar, real collaborations that are more significant and are above board, that is the Palestinian issue. And therefore, if we close all of these 4 factors together, and we know where we want to head, where we want to navigate the state of Israel to, I think we can be even more optimistic than I am. Well, Finn, since we have 2-3 more minutes, we're the last ones, so we can continue a little more. So I have one last question. We don't have a slide about this one. People talk a lot about the black swan, this phenomenon that nobody predicts, comes out of nowhere and really changes the rules of the game. To what extent do you think the Russian intervention in Syria was a small black swan this year? Nobody predicted that there would be Russian aircraft bombing 20 kilometers away from our area of the Golan Heights. Can you imagine in 2016 a scenario that will change at least some of the rules of the game, if not all? Well, since I was previously in the Air Force and I spent many hours in the Syrian skyline, it's very interesting to look at these skies these days. You see Russian aircraft, you see American aircraft, you see French aircraft, you see Turkish aircraft. According to foreign resources, you see Israeli aircraft, and surprisingly, they're getting along up there in the sky. That's the most complicated game you could even invent. Actually, I have a slide about that, but never mind, next time. So by definition, a black swan is something you don't see. That brings us to Ramsfeld. But if I had to place my bet, I would say eastwards rather than westwards. That's simple enough. We have to pay great attention to Jordan, because taking into consideration the threat of IS and their activity abroad and from the district of Sinai and all of these guys, if there's one place where I would be very concerned if I were to hear that these IS vans with their machine guns, basically that's all they have. They don't have a single missile that can reach Tel Aviv. There's not a single country that provides them with weapons. But let's say these scary vans were to drive off to Jordan. By the way, that's the dream of any combat pilot. A black van on a yellow desert. If they were to reach Jordan, that would be a dramatic game changer for Israel, because that 70-kilometer border with Gaza, well, that'll be multiplied by 5 times across the border with Jordan. And I want to go eastwards even further. It's a black swan, but it could happen, and that is the Saudi-Iranian conflict. Both sides, neither side wants to pass this position where you behead a very prominent imam in Saudi Arabia. The Iranians have specialized in burning embassies, but they don't want to surpass this point. And yet, the contradiction between the Arabs and Persians, the Sunnis and Shiites, the conflict over the energy market, over the sanctified and holy places, the self-hate there can lead someone to make a mistake, and after that, that'll be an uncontrollable escalation. That, to me, is the black swan. The oil prices will not be 10, they'll be 200. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all people who participated in this conference, and we will reconvene tomorrow morning.